Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 5, Episode 7, brought to you by Market Dial. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, we are together. We're here. Welcome to Canada, my friend.
We are. Up close and personal.
Up close and personal. If this sounds a bit different, we're recording this live in my backyard on our mic set. So it's great to have you here. What are your impressions so far of, not your first time to Toronto, but what are your impressions so far?
It's not. Well, the weather is beautiful, and you have cooked a tremendous amount of food. So that's been awesome. And my daughters are about to arrive, so it's all good.
So we're just getting our podcast episode in before we head off the airport and pick up the kiddos, and then you're going to be continuing on to visit the third amigo in Montreal, Mr. Carl Boutet.
Carl Boutet coming up fast.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, well, listen, without further ado, that's probably enough due for our listeners. Let's get into our News of the Week. It's a solo episode. We're actually talking about an episode where we've been asked this a couple times. We've done episodes on what we would call small store strategies before. In fact, what was our Honey, I Shrunk the Store? So this is not our first cut or first episode dedicated to thinking about small store strategies. But this episode particularly, we're getting a lot of questions about it. So talk just a little preview before we get to the news about what we're talking about in small store strategy thinking.
Well, the main thing is around department stores, Macy's and Kohl's in particular, who have announced small store strategies as part of their hopes, I guess, to reinvigorate growth. So we're going to go into that in particular, as well as kind of talk just in general about large formats versus kind of satellite or hub and spoke kind of strategies.
All right, and that's going to be coming up. So let's jump into the news. Let's see what strikes you. I see some numbers which actually look fairly positive from a consumer's perspective. I've often said the U.S. consumers like that Timex watch takes a licking but keeps on shopping. So we continue to see the consumer is still spending.
Regular listeners may know that every month the U.S. Census Bureau puts out their overall commerce report. Once again, the press focused on the month-over-month numbers, which were flat. Which made it sound pretty bad, but if you actually look at the year-over-year numbers,
I don't get that.
They were up 10.3% overall.
Good results now, in general, right?
It's a little bit hard to parse out the inflationary aspect of that, though we know that's a pretty big part.
Yeah.
And when you dive a little
bit, it's an uneven part. I was looking at Jason Goldberg's post about smoothing out inflation, but at some categories there's actually de-inflation.
Yeah,
right?
Consumer electronics in particular has had a lot of deflation. I think there's some evidence that apparel is going through that. Yeah. Food is on the higher side. Yeah. So
some foods though, like if you look at the what we call in the business the trifecta of food, beef, pork, and chicken prices actually come down.
Chicken's come down, right? Yeah.
Right. So the details all in the numbers. When you throw out inflation at this percentage versus this, once you get down into it, it gets really interesting.
Yeah, and if you look at the category level year-over-year numbers, a lot of them were up. Again, hard to tell exactly how much is inflation when you look at the aggregate numbers. But clothing, general merchandise, and the home categories were all pretty flat. So when you think about transactions, likely be down or flattish. And then again, consumer electronics and appliances were down a lot. So I think a lot of that is the deflationary impact because there's just a ton of excess supply that people are heavily discounting. You can get a little bit more sense of what's going on when you start to look at some of the big players, not only just looking at the numbers in total, but a lot of times in their earnings calls, they really unpack transaction growth versus average unit retail growth and which categories were strong. So some of the key themes from their earnings were definitely that inventory is a huge issue. A lot of the major retailers reported having their inventory levels way up. Kohl's in particular, inventory's up 49% year over year on negative sales.
We were sitting around the campfire last night talking about a number like that.
Because that's how exciting our Friday nights are.
That's what we do when we sit around the campfire. But you and I were both a bit flummoxed or vexed at that number because it was like, how does somebody authorize a 40% lift in open buy? How does that work?
Yeah, I still don't. I mean, I do think, and we've heard a little bit, is there's some of this over-inventorying which are orders that got hung up,
timing.
Couldn't be canceled, got stuck in China or on the seas or whatever. But yeah, it's hard, even if you say that's a decent amount, when you're it's hard to imagine Kohl's was probably not planning for a down month. We'll talk about them a little bit more in a second. But, they weren't planning for a 20, 30% increase. And Walmart, Target, way over inventoried. Also, they certainly weren't planning for those kinds of sales increases. So TJ Maxx, same thing. So you go down the line here, and there's just these huge increases in inventory with sales, frankly, pretty tepid to not great. So a great time to buy apparel, great time to buy a big screen TV.
Yeah.
The big news, maybe not such a surprise, was Target. So Target had their profits down 90% year over year, and it was almost entirely on the aggressive markdowns they took. Folks may remember, either from the podcast or from just following the news, that Target warned actually twice.
They're one of the first
in
ones
the past 3 months to really talk about how they're seeing some decelerating demand overall, some reallocation of spending, but that they had way too much inventory. So they took a very aggressive posture. They still ended the quarter, though, pretty heavy. So I don't think they're done quite yet, but there's a sense that maybe they're going into the fall a little bit cleaner. Walmart, a lot of people were pleasantly surprised. They did a bit better than their lowered expectations. Sales just up a little bit. Profits, solid, but very high inventory levels. So that there's kind of a sense that they need to get a bit more aggressive. But really across the board, again, we're not going to get into everybody. The other one I guess I'll mention is specific to Kohl's. Not only do they have this crazy inventory level, but they were really one of the few retailers that have reported that actually had sales down significantly. Their revenue fell by 8%, and their net income, of course, plummeted.
And that's year over year, not month over month.
Year over year.
Yeah.
So not to badmouth Kohl's, but they've been trying a lot of new initiatives. They've rolling out Sephora to, I guess they're going to go to all their stores. They're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
That supposedly has been a great source of traffic. They're doing Amazon pickup. They're rolling out this new buy online, pickup in store self-checkout thing. A bunch of these other brands they've been showcasing. And, it just doesn't seem to be gaining any traction. So I think that's and now they're going to have to deal with moving this big pile of inventory through. So I think the next quarter is going to be especially ugly.
Speaking of big piles, I had to laugh when I looked at the merchandising for the new Gap line from Easy. And what did you say online? Is it buy online, pick up on floor?
Yeah, because I saw I wasn't aware of this, but friend of the show, Neil Saunders, who's always out there showcasing the fault in people's stores with bad merchandising and displays and whatnot, showed the Yeezy, were they hoodies or something that were stored in like big bags on the floor.
Purposely. That's the way he wants to merchandise. Yeah.
And it just looked like a pile of crap, basically. So, I don't understand.
All right. Thoughts and
I don't pretend to understand what the kids are into these days. But
so maybe we ask your kids when we pick them up what they think of that. How about that?
I'm sure they'll have brilliant merchandising suggestions.
Let's talk about Amazon for a sec. So there's a bit of a memo released on Business Insider. Now, I couldn't read it. I just don't happen to subscribe to Business Insider right now. But it was talking about, and it gets back to the fault in our Amazon stores about their reorging, including Whole Foods. So what did you pick up from that?
So there's quite a few things in there, and I guess it's not clear how much of this is absolutely the case. But Business Insider got their hands on. They talked to a few people off the record, I guess, and they also got their hands on a few emails. But I think the key points were, first of all, they're bringing in a couple of new executives into the grocery part of the business, one from Woolworths in Australia and the other from Tesco. So, there's been some sense that maybe Andy Jassy, as the new CEO, wasn't too enthralled with the physical store strategy. This certainly suggests, not only Doug Harrington becoming the new head of the group, but some pretty high paid, expensive, well-experienced talent coming in. And then there was just some more detail around plans to roll out and license the Amazon Go technology and just some of the things they need to do to improve Amazon Fresh, which we talked about on that episode.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're clearly going to be investing behind it. There was nothing I wouldn't necessarily make anything of this, but there was nothing in particular about Amazon style that was revealed in the story. That's the new apparel concept.
It wouldn't surprise us that Fresh would be a big focus of any retail thinking, right?
Yeah.
It's the big play.
Absolutely.
It's the big store.
Yeah, and there's also a sense that there was a little bit of sort of the drama or the history of the battle between the old Amazon execs and Whole Foods, which apparently was relatively contentious according to I've heard that, but this seemed to really support that, and that Whole Foods executives were going to be more prominent in the grocery strategy going forward.
Let's take a trip to the Wobbly Unicorn Corner.
Yes, what's going on? Our new part of the metaverse. The Wobbly Unicorn Corner. This week, some of the re-commerce folks or circular commerce folks, Poshmark and ThreadUp, both reported, and consistent pattern here we saw with Warby, Allbirds, others, sales up, profits getting worse, some layoffs being announced as well. And then they've been in the news quite a lot, but Peloton continues to be quite the train wreck, laying off a ton of people, raising prices, closing stores.
I think I read they're closing almost all their, like they're very aggressive.
It's a little unclear, I think, exactly how far they're going. But yeah, it seems like a big
reset
on those stores. And I also saw, I mean, this is, I'm sure, part of the, I think they laid off 1,500 people or something, a very big number, that Peloton opened a big office not too far from me in Dallas, up in the suburb of Plano, and apparently they're going to try to get out of that space. And one that didn't make it onto our little notes here that happened is our friends at Wayfair, Waywork or Wayfair. Also big layoffs.
Hey, come on! He just got funding from. He just got funding from your favorite. Andreessen Horowitz.
Folks at Andreessen Horowitz have given Mr. Newman $350 million. I forget which reporter said that.
I want to fail up like him.
I can't think. It was something like in the most efficient way to incinerate a big pile of cash. Andreessen Horowitz. So yeah, that's interesting. But Wayfair, I think they laid off about 10% of their staff. So pretty significant attempt to try to get on the path to profitability.
So Peloton is up on their pedal, so to speak, with their management taking. I mean, circling back to the beginning of the conversation, whether it's Target, Walmart, they're taking aggressive moves. Like there's no question, they're not sitting on their laurels. They're making big moves and trying to turn
making moves.
We
generally like the more positive moves, but sometimes
you got to do what you got to do, right?
Got to take the heat and the hit.
All right, well, that's the news of the week. Now, before we get to talking more about small store strategy, let's hear from our presenting sponsor. MarketDial is an easy-to-use testing platform and boldens great decisions, leading to reliable, scalable results. With MarketDial, you can be confident in the outcome of your in-store pilot initiatives before rolling them out across your fleet. In a challenging retail climate of supply chain disruption, labor shortages, and dynamic customer behavior, the need for reliable insights has never been greater. Validate your remarkable ideas with MarketDial's in-store testing solution. The proof is in the testing. Learn more at MarketDial.com. That's MarketDial.com. Yogi Berra once said, "It's deja vu all over again." We're back talking about, can small stores save the department store? How is your thinking evolving around all this? Why do we think it's a good another opportunity to take a good run at it in this episode?
If you go back to the episode you referenced, we talked kind of more holistically about different small store strategies. So we got into Target's urban stores and IKEA and a whole bunch of different types of strategies and motivations for doing smaller stores. This time, I think we want to go a little bit deeper on particularly the efforts from department stores. But also, since that time, both Kohl's and Macy's have opened more of these stores and have made this strategy a important part of what they've articulated.
Clearly listening to the podcast.
I don't know about that. I mean, if they listen, they don't take the advice too aggressively. But anyway,
I want to ask you one other thing. So, department stores still need to be saved? I think didn't they do pretty well during the COVID era? Did they get a new lease on life, so to speak?
I really don't think so. I know this is not everybody agrees with me, but I guess what I would say just kind of fundamentally, if you look at department stores, they have been losing market share for actually went and checked the numbers. It's like 27 years straight. In 1994, their share of total retail was about 14%. That dropped to 11% by the year 2000, 5% by the year 2013, and right now they're around 3%. So this massive 3%. Shift, and maybe we can talk a little bit about where that's gone and why. But if you just look at the last few years, the performance of Macy's, Kohl's, Dillard's, JCPenney's harder to know because they're private, but essentially it's flat. This is on the heels of hundreds and hundreds of Sears and JCPenney and other stores closing. Right. So there's not much evidence that any of these guys have become more relevant. Best case, I think you can make a case that they're sort of treading water. But I would argue going forward, most of the trends continue to be negative, and some pretty significant things are going to need to change for these players to stay relevant and in some cases stay in business.
I mean, there's a lot wrapped up in talking about department stores. Both you and I have worked for department stores. I work for Hudson's Bay, still around now with Saks in the U.S., for example. And, over the last 20 years, we've seen iterations. They get into e-commerce. They do different things. They do shop in shops. And is there a way that we can see that department stores can be relevant again? I mean, they had a moment during the COVID era because it was a one-stop shop. Could they rise again?
I really don't see a compelling reason to think that can happen in any fundamental way. I believe department stores will still be around in 10 years. I just think there will be fewer of them, and they need to be the strategy needs to be quite different, which we can start to tie to the small store strategy. The heyday of the department stores, the 60s and 70s, and we got into this a little bit with Alexandra in the last episode, malls and the department stores, their fortunes were inherently intertwined. Malls and the department store anchors were places to go where you could see all this stuff at once. And, in one way of looking at it, they were very convenient. But as discount department stores, Walmart, Target, et cetera, started to grow in the 90s as category killers started to become prominent, they started to lose, both malls and department stores started to lose share. The thing that really happened that I think a lot of people, and it does very much relate to what we'll talk about with small stores, that a lot of people don't understand is a lot of the business started to shift to off the mall competitors. Certainly some share was lost to e-commerce, but nothing prevents Macy's or Penny's or whatever from having a strong e-commerce business. But the share that was very difficult for them to hold on to was the business that was being lost to Target and Walmart and TJ Maxx and Ross and, litany of Ulta, Sephora. You can kind of go down the list. I mean, that's where a lot of the preventable market share, arguably preventable market share loss occurred. And that has almost everything to do with distribution and location, not digital versus physical.
Is it to do something like, the frog in the boiling water, right? That the water just keeps getting hotter, but nobody moves because there's not a crisis. Like, I don't know, I guess Sears going out of business is a pretty crisis, but, you've said it before. A lot of the sectors kind of watch the last 20 years happen. They get into some things, they get out of some things, and they poke along. Is that what prevent? Like what in your mind? I mean, you've sat in these pretty senior chairs in department stores. What prevents a group of individuals who are very capable from saying, this isn't working. We gotta get out of this business or change it fundamentally?
I think there are a couple of things. One is, and I think this is a very fundamental shift in the way business operates. But I think if you look at most of the leaders of these companies, they have grown up in a world which was physically dominant, where incremental change was important. It was about the right assortment, pricing, markdowns. Those were the skill sets that were important. So this idea that you could make incremental improvement, I think just really started to break apart over the last 15 or 20 years, because the things that, like I say, I mean, in the case of formats like a Macy's or, any general department store, winning on this vast assortment of inventory and being a convenient place to go see it, those two fundamental premises have been blown apart. Between TJX companies, Ross and Burlington, they collectively have over 5,000 locations. Macy's has 570 locations. So to go to Macy's, you have to drive, forget, Target, Walmart, Kohl's, et cetera. But you got
to drive by a lot of retailers to get there, right?
Sephora, Ulta, right. As cosmetics players all have many more locations. So the convenience dynamics in just the physical world have completely changed over the last 10, 12 years. Then when you layer on top of that the way e-commerce works, now again, Macy's, nothing prevents Macy's from, or JCPenney or anybody from having a compelling e-commerce business. So I don't tend to focus on that so much, because if they didn't do well there, that was a readily fixable kind of problem.
Well, in fact, you would think, I mean, this was my value proposition when I launched Hudson's Bay in 99, 2000. They said, listen, we don't have stores in every city, and we don't have our assortment in every store in every city. E-commerce is perfect. People know the name. It's hard not to think of the Bay.
Absolutely. Well, and I was at Sears when we launched e-commerce, and we had, very quickly had a several $100 million business. Then I was at Neiman Marcus. We were on our way to $1 billion. Almost 25% of our business was done on e-commerce because we leveraged, the relationships we already had, and it was pretty easy to both, pick up customers, like you say, in places where we didn't have stores, as well as in some cases grow share of wallet with customers we already had that preferred to shop that way. So anyway, I just think that at the risk of stating the obvious, the playing field is so shifted, but a lot of these management teams still seem to be operating from the same kind of strategies that they were leveraging 20 years ago. I think the other thing, and this is a little bit perhaps more inside baseball than people want to get into, but one of the things about the department store business, which I'm sure you know, is most of these retailers pay little or no rent, have fully depreciated stores.
But long leases.
And long leases.
Yeah.
So this idea that you would go and spend money to, invest in different formats in different type of real estate that might cannibalize your existing business, they're getting cannibalized by all the competitors, right? Like it's like, that was always my argument at Sears and Neiman Marcus when we get that pushback. We're like, oh, we're going to spend all this money and then we're just going to take some business away from our mall stores. And I'm like, well, it's happening anyway. It's just that we're getting none of it. But I know, because I've lived in a couple of companies as well as some consulting clients where this idea that you would spend a bunch of money to build new formats that might compete with your low investment existing, even though it's failing slowly, business model, it is often hard to get your head around doing that. And then, the other thing that I think that happens with some, maybe not all, is when your performance gets so terrible, your investors aren't going to go along with bolder
You've lost your leverage, right?
Yeah, or you don't have the capital or the cash to do what you need to do.
And then it's tough to recover. Well, let's talk about what the big department stores that you think about are doing today, because basically what you're saying is if they're to survive, I don't know if we're at thrive yet, they got to really reconfigure their strategy. But what are they doing towards that goal? I mean, talk about what you're observing and describe that and what you think of it.
Yeah, so I'll talk about what they're doing, and then I'll talk about what I think they should be doing, which aren't necessarily exactly the same things. So in the case of Kohl's, they are going to open, I think they've said some different numbers, but I think the current number is about 100 smaller stores. I'll call them smaller stores rather than small stores, because they're not that much smaller than the current Kohl's format. And this is a little bit what we touched on the Honey, I Shrunk the Store episode. To me, there's a difference between optimizing your core format to make smaller trade areas or perhaps, more difficult real estate sites work. So Target pretty famously has opened, a lot of smaller formats, particularly in urban areas.
Yeah. The grocers do a good job of this too, by the way.
Grocers do it. I mean, Walmart's got several hundred neighborhood stores. And so, it's a way of getting deeper market penetration in places where you either couldn't fit a full format store or just the economics of it wouldn't work. And I think that's essentially what Kohl's is doing. They've been a little bit vague, I guess we'll say, about some of the details here, other than they say they've tested it and they're performing well. And so they're going to keep rolling them out. Some of these are in smaller cities, but some of them are really backfill stores. So there's one being built just north of me in a pretty major suburban area. It's a little bit different kind of real estate for them. And these stores look to be about a third smaller than their full format. I think it's a perfectly fine incremental opportunity. I don't think it's fundamentally game changing. I think you could certainly make the argument that Kohl's stores are a little bit overspaced anyway. So is this really just a new prototype when it comes down to it?
Would it have been a smart strategy 20 years ago more than it is today?
Well, I would say this about most of these efforts because, it was crystal clear when I left Sears in 2003. So it's been a long time. It was absolutely crystal clear at that point that department stores were going to continue to lose market share. In fact, we probably could have drawn the line that and be pretty close to how it worked out. Because, at that point it had been 8-9 years of pretty clear trends. So I think that if you were in the mall business, this desire to kind of protect your core format was clearly going to be of diminishing returns. So yes, I think all of these things should have started much, much sooner. Kohl's issue is the same really with all these. I mean, Kohl's has the advantage of having more stores and not being on the mall. That makes them much more convenient for most of their shoppers. And because they're single level, central cashiering, et cetera, they win on convenience in a way that Macy's and Penny's and most others don't. So that is an advantage for them. I think Kohl's issue is they're a little bit too in the middle. They don't have the lowest prices, but they also don't have a lot of, special brands or much experience or customer service. So their issue is being stuck in the middle a little bit in terms of their positioning. But I think their distribution strategy is pretty good. When you get to Macy's, Macy's got a bit more service, a bit more differentiated product, a bit more upscale. So those are advantages, but their position on the mall is really their Achilles heel. So what they're doing, Macy's, Macy's company Macy's Inc. owns both Bloomingdale's and Macy's. And for both of those brands, they are experimenting with smaller stores. So in Macy's brand's case, it's called the Market by Macy's, which is about a 20 to 35,000 square foot store, which I would describe as a little bit as a greatest hits store.
Yeah. Is it a Pareto's Law store, basically? 20% of the merchandise that makes up 80% of the sales. Is that how you would approach that store?
Well, I think what they did is, and I don't know this for a fact because I haven't seen them articulate it, it's just from having been to these stores. I think what they said is, we want to appeal to a younger customer, so we're going to edit the styles that are carried against that sort of customer. And we're going to focus on, and that sort of leads you down a path in terms of certain categories that you're going to carry and emphasize. But pretty much all of the businesses at Macy's other than furniture are represented in this store. So it feels a little bit like it was built by committee, but it definitely has a point of view that is younger and a bit more upscale. So from that standpoint, it's differentiated. They have gone into power centers, I guess you could say. So they're in similar real estate to where you'd find an Ulta, and in some cases, maybe a TJ Maxx, Target, et cetera. So they're playing on that convenience, get closer to the customer angle. And I'm sure if they did their analysis, I've done this analysis at a number of retailers, it's pretty easy to figure out where you start to lose share as which zip codes you're underpenetrated in. So, this seems to be what's driving their strategy. And they've opened in Dallas and Atlanta, I believe, maybe another market so far. And Bloomingdale's has only opened one, as far as I know, Bloomie's store in the DC area in Virginia, and sort of the same strategy. I mean, it's more upscale because the Bloomie's brand is more upscale, but it's essentially the same size and kind of the same general kind of editing process, I think, went on there. I think, having been to both of them, they're reasonably well executed. I'm just not sure what customer need they really meet in a meaningful, incremental way. Because, we talk about all the Targets, all the Walmarts, all the off-price stores, the Ultas, the Sephoras. Like, there's plenty of competition in those same trade areas.
Is there an assumption that there's a Macy's shopper and she's going to be better served if we have more smaller stores? Like, is it kind of one of those particular lenses where, we know she likes shopping at Macy's, but she doesn't have convenient access to the store. So boom, we make more Macy's and we succeed, kind of thing for that.
Well, right. Sure. Well, first of all, I think you absolutely, I don't think Macy's Kohl's, because they have so many more stores, doesn't have quite this issue. But if you're Macy's, if you're Penny's, if you're Dillard's, if you're Neiman Marcus, one of the issues is that you are not close enough to the customer when you only have this one format that has to be in a particular kind of real estate. So I think the motivation to get closer to the customer with some sort of physical aspect, has the potential to get business from people that already like you, but you don't get your fair share because the convenience, so you're solving the convenience limitation. How the numbers on that really sort out, I'm just not sure. I think the challenge for Macy's is they're not especially differentiated. So by putting a bunch of money into, building out all these stores, does that actually win you a lot of customers that already sort of like you, but for the reason you point out, the convenience, they don't shop with you? Or do you mostly get customers that already shop with you that say, oh, now great, I don't have to drive 20 minutes. I can just go, around the corner. And it's not that much of an incremental opportunity. I worry, now I assume this is something they're paying attention to. I worry that there's not enough of an incremental opportunity because it doesn't meet that profound a customer need in a very differentiated way. But, without that data, it's hard to know for sure.
Is there room in your thinking that having more stores, let's just talk about Macy's for a while, gets you more consideration? You certainly got awareness, and then you go online and shop. Like we've talked about how some stores are opening up physical stores because it's a nice way to remind people they exist. And okay, I've only got a small assortment, but I'm going to go, oh, that's right, they got a great internet site, so it's cheaper than paying Facebook.
Right.
Is there room in your thinking?
Absolutely. And I think that's when you open any kind of physical store now, you have to think about all the different roles it performs. And one of them for sure is marketing. And I think that's, often been neglected by some of the traditional players. And so I think if you were going to be a compelling player in each and every city, trade area, metro area, however you want to think about it, you've got to think about this portfolio strategy. And I think one of the dangers of what we've seen with Macy's and Penny's and others over the years is they've been closing stores. And so they're making themselves less convenient in the face of competition, which has many more outlets, both from, physical proximity to actually go buy stuff, but also that billboard effect of marketing. Plus, one of the things that's become hugely important is buy online, pick up in store or fulfill from store. So having more nodes or, kind of a hub and spoke system could be pretty important in serving the customer, not just having a place for them to go look at a ton of products. So I do think that's important.
Yeah. And it's a nice segue over to actually what, Nordstrom talked about when they opened their local, right? I remember seeing one of the Nordstrom executives talk about how, our customers driving around with a return in her trunk for 3 weeks because our store isn't that convenient. Let's open smaller stores so she can return product and get stuff tailored. And they seem to have taken a different tack. Let's not try and figure out what assortment works in a very small format. Let's rethink about what the format does. Are you a fan of what Nordstrom's trying to do?
I have liked local for a long time. I talk about them in my keynotes. I feature them in the book. It's not clear to me because they haven't opened any in 2 years whether it's really getting the results they want. But for the audience that may not know, local, there's I think 7 or 8 of them in the LA area and in New York. They are stores without any actual merchandise. They're only a couple thousand square feet. They offer personal shopping and tailoring services, but they've mostly become a place for buy online, pick up in store and buy online, return to stores. And I think, very much their strategy is to kind of surround their flagship stores, if you could call them that, their big department stores that we know and love, with these smaller hubs. And I do think that does give them some of that advertising halo effect that you were talking about. But it meets a very particular set of needs. Maybe they don't have it quite right. Maybe they need to have, I'm making this up, but, maybe they need to have a shoe store something with some more merchandise.
Something's not working, or else they'd have more. I mean, it's not like they lack funds to open 50.
No, and they're not. I'm sure operationally they're not that simple, but it's not a big capital, and there's certainly plenty of real estate available and lots of places to take 1,800 square feet or something. Number one, if you're going to be a big store with lots of stuff, what is really the pull to that store just beyond it's a place to see a vast variety of things that aren't particularly differentiated? Because on the one hand, the internet's really good at that. On the other hand, if you know what you want and you're convenience driven, there's lots of stores in your neighborhood that are way more accessible. And if the product isn't that differentiated, or if you're largely price driven, then the mall stores are, for the most part, stuck in the middle.
I like going to a department store when I don't know what I want. It's a funny way of saying it, but
Sure.
I don't always know what I'm going to get my wife for her birthday, just because I would, so I'm just get on the escalators at Hudson's Bay or Nordstrom and see if anything jumps out at me.
Sure.
I think that I like.
Well, that's why I think and I agree, and I do that too. I'm not married at the moment, but so it's not because of my wife.
Presents for my wife.
But when no, sorry, I should clarify that. But when I was married, I did that, and this is why I don't think department stores are ever going to go completely away. I mean, they serve a certain need, but there's way more retail space that is pretty undifferentiated than the demand, and so unless the fundamental demand for that were to shift in a pretty profound way. And I just can't work out why that would happen in the face of, everything that's going on in retail. So I don't think that it's going to go away, but I think you have to figure out, if you're a Macy's or a Penny's or a Dillard's or really any of these brands, how do you reconfigure your portfolio? Can you make, for example, and I don't know what the number would be, but maybe 200 of the 570, I think it is, Macy's stores should really be extra special. Add more differentiated products or services or restaurants, or, I don't know what all those things should be, but be much more of a pull, give you a reason to say, rather than just running into Target or running into TJ Maxx or, wherever, Kohl's for that matter, there's a special reason for me to go to that store. Above and beyond, it's a great place to see a particular mix of merchandise. But then, either exit a lot of those other stores were just kind of a mishmash of nothing really, to do something different, whether that's category specialty stores, whether it's, what they're doing with these smaller, more boutique stores. But I think right now this idea that we're going to have, 650 JCPenney stores, 570 Macy's stores, 250 Dillard's stores, that's just way more space in the current configuration than can possibly make sense. And the only reason more of them haven't shut is either because they have such a low basis that it's easy for them to be cash positive, or the cost of getting out is prohibitive. Or in the case of JCPenney in particular, they're owned by mall operators that, want to try to navigate probably what will end up being kind of the slow liquidation of that business as they reposition those malls.
Well, let's end off, great discussion. Let's end off with your thoughts on strategic lessons for retailers.
Well, the first thing I would say is make sure that your aim is true. When you really think about the customers you're serving, do you really have a good understanding of the customers, their needs, their wants, and why they're buying from you, or why you might be able to get them to buy from you? You've got to really focus on, which customers are you talking about, and how do you maintain or ideally increase your relevance? Because the reason why department stores have lost share for 25 years is they became increasingly less relevant. And so you're not going to store close your way to becoming more relevant. You're not going to cost cut your way to becoming more relevant. You've got to deliver something or a set of things that are more valuable. So you really got to answer those questions and not let the real estate, be sort of the anchor. And, we've talked about it. There's anchor stores and there's anchor stores, right? Like
there's anchor stores around your neck.
Right. And the anchor around your neck. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing, which we kind of touched on, is it's really important to think about your overall trade area or metro area, market area strategy. If you had to do it all, like I could tell you for sure, if JCPenney had to do it all over again, they would not have their current format of stores in, 12 malls in the DFW area, right? Like that would not be what you would do from a start, right? Both in terms of the size, location, et cetera. So I think it is worth starting with a blank sheet of paper and saying, ideally, what would our mix or configuration of formats look like? And that might be, like I say, could be 4 flagship stores, 3 outlet stores, 5 service, I don't know, it would be different for each retailer.
Sure.
But the goal is to be more relevant to the customer and to outperform the competition that you're trying to win the share away from or keep the customers from defecting. So I think those are the 2 main things. And you should, by the way, on that trade area analysis, it's physical and digital, because to your earlier point, we know that physical retail is important to maximizing the e-commerce opportunity and vice versa. So it's very important to take that kind of all-channel view.
Well, it's a great discussion because I think, let's say some folks that listen may not all be department store operators or interested in the category, but there's broader strategic lessons, which I think is a great way to end the discussion, is really, whether you run a department store, a grocery store, a specialty store, or DTC brand, consider some of the more interesting strategic questions as you align and make your brand remarkable, which is what it's going to take more and more to be successful. Great discussion. Let's leave it there. If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, your favorite podcast platform, so you can catch up with all our great interviews, like our discussion with Seth Godin on what retailers can actually do to fight climate change. New episodes of Season 5, presented by Marketal, will show up each and every week. And be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us.
And I'm Steve Dennis, author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and producer and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one, plus the host of the popular YouTube cooking show Last Request Barbecue. You can learn even more about me on LinkedIn or meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.